Hi everyone, good evening, and a really warm welcome to tonight's ThinkIn, where we're going to be talking about greatest albums and asking the question whether music needs a new canon. I'm Liz, and I'm an editor at Tortoise, and I can see some people here who are familiar will know who I am, and some people whose names I haven't seen for a while. And I just checked before the ThinkIn my top 25 most played on iTunes, and it's New Order, Sarah Bareilles, Taylor Swift, Little Mix, Nicki Minaj, Janelle Monáe, Dixie Chicks and Nancy Griffith. And on that basis, it is clear that I am not a fit and proper person to edit this ThinkIn, which is why I'm delighted that Pete Paphides instead, who is an entirely fit and proper person to edit this ThinkIn, is going to take over. As always at Tortoise, it's a bit of Pete and an amazing lineup of invited experts this evening, but we need you too to make this ThinkIn work, but also to make the list itself. You know, we are going to put this together and we're going to publish it in Tortoise, and maybe we'll do a podcast too. So please don't hold back. Get stuck in the chat. If you want to rep hard for Beyonce, then go for it. It's a safe space. There's no judgment here. So please get stuck in. And my colleagues Zav and Phoebe will be there to sort of bounce around some ideas too. So thank you so much for being here, and handing over now to surely legendary music critic is a fair assumption. It's
you
Pete
clearly haven't seen my top 25. You clearly haven't seen my top 25 most songs on Spotify. I'm going to talk very quickly. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the three experts that we have that we'll be welcoming, and there's so many achievements to fit in. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about an artist whose standing seems to go a bit larger with every album he releases. He's a percussionist, both drums and tabla. He grew up in India, where he immersed himself not just in the indigenous Indian music that surrounded him, but rock and jazz. The love of jazz has snowballed. He moved over here over 10 years ago now, formed the Upaj Collective, which released a stunning live album in 2018, My East is Your West. Last year, he released probably my album of the year, an incredible piece of work, which saw him draw upon the nascent rap scenes of Mumbai and New Delhi. And you might have seen him on television last week as part of BBC4's Jazz 625 special. His name is Sarathy Kalwar, and we'll say hello properly in a minute, but I'm just going to tell you briefly about our other two experts. Well, our next one barely needs an introduction. She's one of this country's foremost ambassadors of life-affirming pop, a position she formalized this year with her regular kitchen discos broadcast, as their name indicates, from her kitchen. Who of us can forget the touching spectacle which saw her attempting to console a tearful child whilst gamely completing the song she was singing? We've all been there. You can now make her kitchen disco your kitchen disco, thanks to the release of her new kitchen disco album, which gathers together her best love hits throughout the years. And so that's delightful. You probably guessed it's Sophie Ellis-Bextor, of course. And finally, our third expert. Well, this is a massive privilege. He's a veritable music institution. He's been putting smiles on faces thanks to his knack of always being able to choose the song you didn't know you really wanted to hear at this moment in time. 4 decades now, he's excelled at that job with Kiss FM, BBC Radio, and his impeccably selected Soho Radio broadcasts. He's been at the heart of sound system culture for even longer. A regular fixture at the Notting Hill Carnival, and his autobiography, the suitably titled Mr. Good Times, came out last year to a uniformly enthusiastic reception. So we've got lots to talk about with him. I'm of course talking about Norman J. MBE. So hello everyone, thank you for joining us. Not sure who I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with Sophie, I think. What's your favorite album of all time, Sophie?
Well, it's quite tricky, isn't it? To pick one, but actually I think I'd go for Like a Prayer by Madonna, because it was a really formative album for me. It's a really bold, dynamic, ambitious pop record, and it's got on it one of what I think is arguably the best pop record of all time. This is the title track, Like a Prayer, which I think is an amazing pop song.
It is. It's a fantastic record, and yet I don't think I've ever seen Like a Prayer on any top 100 album lists. Why do you think that is, Sophie?
Well, it's interesting because, before tonight, you sent me over some lists as a compilation of all these best of, and, the albums that form the top spots over and over, they're all really, brilliant albums. Revolver by the Beatles is brilliant. So Sgt. Pepper, OK Computer probably be on my top 10 albums as well. But I think actually that Liz kind of hit the nail on the head at the beginning, really, when she was saying, this is a safe space, no judgment, and reading at her list. I think that there's this uncomfortable bedfellow with our emotional response to music, and then our fear that we're going to say something where everybody's going to go, oh my God, I can't believe you like that. And because you like that, you probably don't know what you're talking about, the other stuff. But actually, I would like to eliminate guilty pleasures as a concept from pretty much everything. I just don't think it's helpful. Just go with your gut. What makes you feel good? What makes you want to dance around? If it has an effect on you, an emotional response, and the same thing happens every time you hear it, it's probably brilliant. And that's okay.
Were you always this brave, Sophie? Would you have said this sort of 10 or 15, 20 years ago?
Oh, I think I spent a lot of time, especially as a teenager, feeling like I didn't have the authority to say much about anything I really liked, actually. I think, you're so worried about being cool and, wanting to say the right thing and fit in. But I think as I've got older, I just realized what a waste of time that was, really. Once you embrace the things you love, it's so nice. And actually, they are really good on their own 2 feet. But, I went into pop music, and then pop's such a dirty word for so long. And I quite like being the underdog, Sod it. It lowers the bar. It's much easier that way.
Yeah, it's very pleasant down here. So, Sarathy, what springs to mind as maybe being your 2 or 3 favorite records of all time?
Yeah, I've written down a few here just off the top of my head. Asian Dub Foundation, Facts and Fictions,
right? Okay.
1995. Don Cherry, Organic Music Society. I think when it comes to albums like these, for me, it's always been about music that I can see myself in. Asian Dub Foundation, when it came out, I was about 10, 12 years old, and I suddenly saw a band for the first time that had the word Asian in it, looked like me, making really punk, loud political music, and it made a lot of sense to me. And I think you're right. Sorry, go on.
So I was just going to say, for people who don't know Asian Dub Foundation, they're a British-based band, sort of fusing different elements of their. I think the main songwriter is Chandra Sonic. I think did he come from an Indian background?
Yeah, he comes from an Indian Bengali background, and so it's kind of like a fusion of Punjabi music with electronic music, with drum and bass, jungle, rock, punk.
It's interesting because at this point you were still in India. Yeah.
I mean, so I think word of all the music that was happening here and the kind of Asian underground movement had slowly spread to India, and we were hearing people for the first time who were brown and were making this music that we didn't associate with brown people making before, And for me, it's always, I agree with Sophie, it's exhausting trying to be cool as a teenager, and, we all do it. And for me, it was very much about trying to find something that nobody else was into at the time. And,
Sophie mentioned guilty pleasures. What would have been a guilty pleasure for you?
A guy called Lucky Ali. Nobody maybe knows of him, but he's this kind of pop star in India at the time. And he was kind of this really, singer-songwriter. They call baby making music. And he's beautiful, but I would have never admitted to liking him. Never in a million years,
That's interesting. I always wondered what a guilty pleasure would be, because often I sort of seek out, I come from a position of total ignorance, so I will often seek out dramatic, melodramatic, overblown Bollywood music with quite sort of sentimental kind of sort of stringer. Everything is overblown. I've got no idea if that's cool or uncool, and I find that quite refreshing. So I don't really know if someone such as yourself, who I think you were in quite a cool crowd at school, weren't you? And you were listening to...
I was trying to be. I was really trying very hard to be. you know, and the Bollywood stuff that we were hearing all around us wasn't stuff that was cool for us because it was everywhere. It was popular, basically. So we were trying to get away from it as much as possible as kids growing up, you know. And a lot of us listened to a lot of rock and roll, and I grew up listening to the Beatles and the Doors and Hendrix and all these people, and Indian classical music was always around, but it was my parents' music, so I didn't really want to associate myself with any of that till much later. And I think for me, and I think a lot of people I speak to, there's also often this guilt that's associated with actually never having had a phase where, like, people talk to me when I came here about like Blur versus Oasis, and they talk about David Bowie. And to me, like, culturally, they're still like stuff that I was never really into. I don't know this music very well. Like, I feel guilty for having, I mean, it's you know, for having said it, although there's nothing wrong with saying it. But I remember Zadie Smith saying this as well on one of her interviews, saying like, you know, that music didn't speak to us in the same way it did to a majority of people in this country, or, you know, or popular music.
This is why I'm interested in the idea of these. Look, whenever you look up a list of the 100 best albums of all time, the lists that seem to have survived, I mean, perhaps there were no other lists, I don't know, but the ones that sort of were made for NME and for Q and Melody Maker, Rolling Stone, these are the ones that survive. And I always wonder, is Norman with us now, by the way? Oh, hi, Norman. I don't think I can hear your voice. Are you muted? I think you might be muted.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Norman.
Yeah.
Hi, Norman.
Hi, how are you, Pete?
I'm very well. Lovely to see you. I'm just going to bring you in at this point. Did you hear what Sarathy was saying?
Yeah.
And that seemed to be a good point to bring you in, because, you know, you really represent a sort of a parallel history of music to the one I often see. You know, I grew up reading the music press, NME, Q, and even, you know, I was quite horrified, to be honest, to see some of these lists that sort of, you know, the NME list from 2013, we're not talking about 25 years ago, it's only 7 years ago. You know, you have to go down to number 17 until you see a black artist.
Well, I think that's where you and I were different. Growing up, Pete, I never read the music press. It didn't speak to me. When I say the popular music press, I read what I perceived to be black music press. Read the Blues and Soul magazine, Echoes magazine, but I didn't really derive my knowledge from reading about it. I don't know. I hung out in record shops. I spent so much time hanging out in record shops, and that's what really helped me. And then as soon as I was old enough to go out, I'd go and listen to stuff, mainly house parties and stuff. I mean, I was just watching just a bit of Steve McQueen's series of films the other night, and it was one about Lovers Rock. Yeah, I went to Lovers Rock parties. That's how I found out about my music. But even though it wasn't, you know, hand on heart, I wasn't really too much into the scene, because by the time that scene came about, you know, I was an out and out soul boy. But, you know, I agree totally with Sophie with her comment about guilty pleasures. Well, guilty pleasures, I don't feel guilty for anything that I like. I never felt the need, and more so now as I've got older, to justify my taste to anybody else. You're free to like it, you're free to hate it. That's the great thing about music. And again, coming back to what Sophie says, you know, if it moves you, to my ears, if it moves you, it's right. If it doesn't move you, then don't spend your time negatively trying to work out why it doesn't work. You're surrounded by, if you're lucky enough to have access to so many different types of music, or even more of the same that you like. Yeah. So I've always tried to, even from a young age, try to spend my music time positively. I only go after the stuff that I like, and some of the stuff that my instinct and my ears tell me I might not like this now, I might not get it now. 6 months' time, 6 years' time, and that still happens to me today. Still hear stuff that probably dismissive of, but not in a negative way. I was just more interested in finding the stuff that I did like, or the stuff that appealed to me. And I've revisited stuff, and thought, wow, now I get it. And conversely, you know, I'd hear music within the first 3 or 4 bars and know this is right, this is hitting the spot. And I, as a DJ, go out and play it out. People just don't get it sometimes for weeks, months, years even. But fortunately for me, that's the fact that a lot of people didn't get it, you know, taught me an awful lot. That people, you know, the circumstances have to be right in the way you hear and disseminate music. You can go out feeling in a contrary mood, bad mood, go out and hear the DJ play the biggest or best record of the year, and it does nothing for you. And conversely, you might go there completely off guard, unexpected, hear something, you think, bang, you get a light bulb moment. This tune is driving you absolutely mental. You love it. So that's the beauty of music for me. That's why I love it.
I asked the others. I've got to ask you. What's the album, the foolproof album for you?
Foolproof album. I thought long and hard of it. You know, I'm in my 60s now. I've got over 50 years of buying music, so it was really hard to think. But I'm thinking back in my teenage days when I was out virtually 7 nights a week, going to every club, losing a lot of weight, dancing to some incredible records. I think the Double Exposure album, 10%, when that came in the summer of '76, that was a complete game changer for me. And then that's 20 years later, 25 years later, the Young Disciples album, Road to Freedom from 1991 on Talking Loud.
Came out on the label that you were doing.
I still have it on constant rotation now to this day.
It's an incredible record. I'm glad you mentioned that because obviously all three of you have made albums. I mean, I guess you weren't in the band, Norman, but it was an album that you were very.
I was the A&R man. I was the one that said yay or nay to the tracks, the mixes.
You found samples for it, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
So yeah, that was, you were right at the center of it. Is when this is a question for the three of you now. What's when you're sort of making an album, what are you trying to make an album that's just sort of good? Do you worry about whether or not it'll be important? Do you want it to have something to say, or are you just focused on making something that you can take home and listen to?
Well, can I answer that first? In an ideal world, if you bow to your inner artistry and creativity, you would make your perfect album. But there's no such thing as doing it your way, contrary to what the record said. When you're making an album with record companies' money, there's the head of A&R, that there's everybody in a record company feels that they have what they do because they're lending you the money to make the record in the first place. They shape, and give nuance to your creativity. So partly the album that you think is absolutely brilliant, that you're never 100% happy with because other people have had to make very important decisions which affect, the making of that album.
Yeah.
I don't know if the guys out there, I say that as a former A&R man.
Absolutely, and I want to come back to that. Actually, I hold that thought because I'm interested in the issue of sustaining longevity in genres that the people at the label might not necessarily be that familiar with. And it struck me over the years that does sometimes put certain artists at a disadvantage. But I wanted to just throw over to Sophie, because of course you've had experience of recording for a major label, and is it hard to sort of sustain a career from album to album when you're sort of trying to sort of as a pop artist? Do you find that you're subject to different kind of criteria evaluation than sort of a rock or an indie artist?
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose for a decade with Universal, I knew no other way, and I found it very frustrating making an album by committee. But at the same time, I learned lots. I got lots of experiences I wouldn't have had if I'd been going another route. I was able to tour the world with those records, work with, you know, I literally would write a songwriting list of like, you know, I worked with Andy Partridge from XTC, I worked with Paul from the Warner Dies. I'd just be like, who else got, you know, Glenn Tilbrook. I was like, I just want to write with loads of different people, really just see what happens. And I enjoyed all that. But I have to say, after a decade with Universal, the first thing I did when I left was make an album completely independent with no A&R man. Just use my own money so I can make my own decisions. And it was like, starts with Ukrainian strings and it's like folk. And it's, I think I just needed to wash that label right out of my hair kind of thing. Just like, I want to do my own thing. And I had no idea how Wanderlust, which is my 5th record, was going to do commercially. But I thought I just need to pull the rug out from under my feet and just do something a bit scary. And actually I thought it was going to do really badly. And that didn't scare me at all. It was like, sod it. You know, I've earned this right. I was about 34 and I just thought, you know, I could either buy myself a sports car or pay for an album. I'm going to pay for an album and I'll do it just to have fun. And I loved it. It like changed my life really. And I enjoyed every step of that, making that record and then touring it. It was gorgeous.
Record for people watching, I'm very familiar with that record. It's a fantastic bunch of songs. You are, you know, I don't think people go on about it enough, but you're such a brilliant songwriter.
Oh,
and
I have lots of lovely people I work with. I can't take credit really. I did it with Ed Harcourt, who's brilliant. So, you know, I'm never the most talented person in the room, and that's kind of like a bit of a good thing really. I've come to really embrace that.
Sarathy, I wanted to ask you the same question in terms of the difference between what we consider a good album or an important album. You know, I felt like the album that you made last year, More Arriving, which was a real sort of a snapshot of the sort of emerging tensions of the world as it was and as it still is really this and last year. It's a very electrifying, explosive record at times. Do you think when you're putting together a list, should the really, really great albums, should they be important as well, or does that not figure in the picture?
I think it's such a personal thing, but context is everything, isn't it? I think like when that album came out, when you heard it, for me, making albums has always been about more than just the songs. You know, it's an opportunity to think about the artwork, the names of the songs, the way the entire thing is going to be seen. And I still love making albums as opposed to singles or EPs or whatever, you know, because it just gives me the chance to like express myself in more ways than just the music. And I think that can be a really powerful thing to do. And I think so great albums, or albums that anyway I gravitate towards, affect me in more ways than one, obviously, you know. And it's not only the music, it might be just the artwork that really touches me, or, you know, it could be anything. It could be an interlude between two songs that really does it for me, or, you know. So yeah. Is there
an issue with some of these lists I've been looking over the past, you know, various lists over the past 20 years, and I sort of wonder, you know, I feel like I've come to the view that every list you see sort of tells us a story about ourselves at that moment in time. And I sometimes think of, you know, albums that kind of appear over and over again, which I think sometimes must be quite confusing for people who didn't necessarily grow up with that music. I guess I'm thinking about maybe the Stone Roses album, which is just a very pretty record of kind of pop songs played with guitars. But I sort of wonder if it's almost kind of bewildering sometimes to people that don't grow up with kind of, you know, the basic guitar, bass, drum setup. Just these records that just appear over and over again, and they're kind of pretty, but they're not anything more than that. Have any of you got a view about that? Shall I just pick a name at random? Norman. Norman?
No. Well, I say, you know, he or she who holds the pen writes the history, writes the chart, and it normally stems from the music that's directly influenced them in the beginning. If you play any record enough times, you know, back then, you know, a lot of these charts were formed because the only way you heard them was on the Radio 1, who had a complete monopoly of what you heard, when you heard it, and how many times you heard it. And they had the knack, because they were in the position to do that, to even brainwash you into telling you that relatively crap or mediocre records were brilliant if you play something enough times that it becomes almost like a truth.
Yeah.
And the whole of that white record industry then is premised on that.
Yeah.
Whereas the black music thing is kind of different in a way, because like you said, you know, those original charts, it's based on that old format, drums, guitar, tell a story in 2 minutes and 38 seconds. That art seems to be lost. And as those albums, those artists were given the freedom or earned the freedom to record certain songs, write certain songs, and really fully express their creativity, I don't begrudge them at all. You know, people like Elton John. I'm name taking people that I like personally.
Yeah.
And never been guilty about saying I loved them. You know, I like Elton John. I like Lennon and McCartney as songwriters. Not the biggest fan of the Beatles, but particularly the black acts that have covered Lennon and McCartney songs.
Funnily enough, I played
absolutely incredible. And it's just about a different interpretation. And I think that's amazing. But I mean, if you said to me, Norman, that you go on Rolling Stone and pick a top 20, it'd be completely otherworldly to what the established rock heads would write about, because I don't really know that much about that music. I cherry pick the ones that I like, and only then because my access to them is via the radio.
Yeah.
But given a choice, you know, I'm surrounded with 50 years of black music in all of its forms. And I guess it's comfort zone. That's where I go first. But, you know, I've never denied that I like pop records, never shied away from playing them. I mean, just last week on my radio show, played a Cliff Richard record. The only Cliff Richard record that I own, the only Cliff Richard record that I like.
Which one?
It's a version of Things We Said Today, Lennon and McCartney, Beatles record. You listen to Cliff Richard's version of that.
I've got no issue with Cliff at all.
I have.
Late 70s, early 80s Cliff.
Not a fan at all. But you know, I like people based on the music. I listen to anything. Well, what I play may be different, but I certainly am open-minded enough. You know, one thing music has taught me: never dismiss any genre.
No, absolutely.
You can't, if you really truly love music, you can't dismiss any genre, however out there it might be, because then what would you say to yourself when one tune from that particular genre that you spent your life convincing yourself you don't like, are you going to say you don't like that record?
It's no way to live, is it?
You can lie to everybody else, but you can't lie to yourself.
No, absolutely not. Do you think that we're going to try and put together a new list? I think. Do you think it would be? I mean, would it be nice? It would be nice to have a list where everyone can see themselves, right? Sarathy.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, just going back to the lists where, you know, like Norman was saying, he wasn't reading the lists that maybe you were reading when you were growing up, Pete. And I think, yeah, being able to have a list where you can see people or music that you're into would be a good idea.
Yeah. And the other thing that occurred to me, and I wonder if you have a view of it really, is actually partly this occurred to me when I was watching you on BBC4 the other day, Sarathy, when on this fantastic sort of showcase really of all the sort of this emerging new British jazz scene that's sort of coming to the fore. It's very different to any other kind of jazz scene we've had in the past. There's just so, you know, this kind of, I guess it's kind of there's a kind of more Afrocentric aspect to a lot of it, and suddenly it kind of, it retrospectively makes you think, you know, if given how popular this music is becoming, it's suddenly, that in itself is changing history, because it's suddenly kind of making us sort of think, realize that actually there's a whole load of other records that you never see in these charts that maybe are more important than these lists give them credit for. I noticed someone just popped up in the chat, mentioned Kendrick Lamar, who again I think is someone who's draws so much of a wide palette of influences, and it occurs to me that maybe part of the reason for this change is that the critic as a sort of gatekeeper, you know, this person who you'd have to go to get recommendations from. Well, because now everyone can hear everything at any time, that's kind of gone, really. So the job I used to have is kind of almost redundant. Do you think this is for any of you, really? Do you think that's a factor?
I do. I think that the fact that now we can, when I was younger, if you wanted to buy a single or an album, you had already made quite a big commitment just by the thing of going into the record shop and trying to find it. And if you couldn't see it on the shelf, going to ask at the counter. And that's what one thing I really love about the way we can access music now is I think everybody can be a lot bolder and experiment with different genres. You know, you could hear something on the radio in the morning. By the end of the day, you've listened to their whole back catalogue and maybe found the things you liked. So I think for me, that makes the whole process, firstly, it makes it mean you haven't got that thing of having to be very visible in testing the water of different things. Yeah. But also it's much more democratic, I think, because you're just thinking, okay, I'm going to make up my own story with this and cherry pick the things that make sense to me. Although I have to say, I'm still disappointed that when Norman was talking about Cliff Richard, I was really keeping my fingers crossed it was going to be Mistletoe and Wine. That just would have really cracked me up. I was picturing Cliff as one of the people involved here now going, oh, it's a cover.
Cliff had some odd covers in the late. I think he did a cover of the Rolling Stones' "Blue Turns to Grey" as well, which was better than you might expect. But anyway, that's I'm digressing. Did you ever buy a record on the basis of a review that you felt completely misled by?
Buy a record based on a review?
Yeah, so you know, someone was kind of raving about a record, and then you went out and bought it in pre Spotify times.
Oh, I think I only did it if a band said. I remember buying. Is it called? Oh, it's that Wire album that Blur and Elastica both cited.
Is it Pink Flag?
Yeah, Pink Flag. That I didn't really get that. I bought it though. I wanted to definitely listen to it, but I was just like, oh, I don't really get this. It didn't speak to me.
That's the opposite of a guilty pleasure. That's sort of a guilty aversion that I think you've got there.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, no.
So, Norman, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Do you think it's a good idea to sort of try and rebuild a canon? Because I get a bit depressed by all these lists, and you know, to be honest, go on. Sorry.
Does the younger generation really need lists? You know, I survived quite happily without them. You know, I don't know, maybe I was just odd or weird. You know, I never read magazines to read reviews to you know, my path to discovery was different, I think. Well, because maybe mine was mainly dance music, I guess, and listening music, because, you know, it's like Sophie said, it was a big commitment. I spent the most part of my life in record shops, making the commitment to go to the record shop. You know, even in my first job, you know, I get paid about 12 quid a week, rush to the West End to my favorite shop, the Contempo in Hanway Street. Spend, you know, be the last person in the shop, being kicked out when they closed. They're not having enough money for my bus fare or train fare to get home. And I would walk home, the 8 miles from the West End to home. But gripping my vinyl, thinking, I've got my records, nothing else matters. But as everyone's alluded to, I think it's really good now because it's really democratic now. And people do feel free, especially the younger generation. They feel free now to they don't have to justify or explain to anybody what they like. you know, a few DJs out there, you know, Giles Peterson, I'll cite a few myself. There's a few DJs out there who were eclectic before eclectic became a thing. And the greatest thing that happened for me was the invention of the iPod Shuffle, because then suddenly it made sense of playing soul records to hip hop records, and then throwing the odd jazz tune in there to rock. You know, the iPod Shuffle enabled people to learn to do that themselves and accept it. So when, like, you know, DJs like myself took that concept live, instead of scaring a lot of people, it made an awful lot of sense. But I think it's a great thing that people feel free. I mean, I'm not a listener. I don't do Spotify. I don't listen to, I don't stream. I don't do any of that. You know, I'm surrounded by millions of records. When I'm at home, I play my own records.
What about when you're on the bus?
Yeah, when I'm on my bus, headphones, CDs, I don't stream. I don't, mainly because I don't know how to. It doesn't really interest me. My sons keep going, God, Dad, you really need to be doing this. You know, if I'm out in a shop, you know, shops have great soundtracks. They have Spotify on. I might be out there shopping with my wife or my kids and hear something, wow, what's this? The other great invention, Shazam. Within seconds,
yeah,
you just, what's this?
I use it a lot when I'm listening to your show, Norman.
You know, but the way we disseminate, listen to music now is completely changed for the better, I think. And it's much more democratic. You know, it snuffs out the elitism thing. It snuffs out the being guilty because you like this, because you like that. So,
does this is a question for all of you, really? Does the album as a format favor certain genres more than others?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't want to hog this thing. I've got great people there.
Tell us briefly why, and then I'm going to throw to the others.
Yeah, I think the serious sort of artists who've got a statement to make can only really accomplish that through the album format. You know, you need to see the many sides of an artist, the many moods of an artist. I think the most pointless albums when there's only one song and 10 other good ideas as tracks.
Right.
But they're not really saying anything, they're not speaking anything, they're not commenting on anything. Right. But that thankfully, there are still, you know, look at the people I'm in the company with Sarathy and Sophie. They are album makers. You know, they have something to say. There are people out there who have ears to listen, who will tune into that. Just as there's going to be people out there who goes, no, that music, that's not for me. But for the people who do get it, it's great. It gives you an insight into that person as an artist and enables them to grow as well creatively.
Sophie, I noticed that some of these lists, like the NME one from 20 years ago, I think, or maybe even longer, includes compilation albums. This is for all of you actually, but let's start with Sophie. Does a compilation album count as an album? Should it? Because if it's kind of part of your life, surely, if you've grown up with it as a kind of.
Yeah, but I think, you know, going on from what Norman says, and I mean, I totally agree with him, by the way. I've always thought how brilliant you're getting a whole album to set out your stall and show off different things, and what a relief not all the songs need to sound like a single, especially as a pop artist. That's a lovely place to play and experiment. But I think compilations, I think they can hold a special place in your own heart, but I wouldn't be like pressing, you know, Now 20 into someone's hand and saying, you got to listen to this. I think that's more like a nostalgia thing, really. I think soundtracks though, you know, like I think the Guys and Dolls soundtrack is amazing. I think the Moana soundtrack is amazing. So I think that could probably go in there. That's got to tell a story. Some of those, you know, the lyricism in it can be amazing, really pleasing. But no, a compilation, I think you're on shaky ground if you're like, oh, it's classic. You know, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
I'd like to make an honourable exception for Caitel's Hotrax album, which came out in 1979, which I think is a sort of snapshot of a British pop culture, which was an intersection of so many different kind of interesting places. So yeah, Norman mentioned Lovers Rock the other day, and Silly Games is on it. Silly Games next to Living on the Front Line by Eddie Grant, and then it went into Sparks. And then, you know, in many ways, my entire taste in music that spidered out since then, it was all sort of pretty much kind of established on that one Caitel compilation.
Well, actually, now you've said that, it's made me think. Actually, there's a Larry Levan Paradise Garage album, and that was really influential on me. But I guess then you have kind of got a curator, haven't you? You've got someone behind it that's telling a story through the music. When I think of compilations as a thing, I think of, like, I don't know, something that's churned out, like songs to bring Christmas into your car or whatever. I don't.
Yeah. Sarathy,
Yeah.
can I bring you in? You know more about jazz than I will ever know on my dying day. So I'm gonna sort of come to you with this specifically with this question. I think the view that a lot of jazz musicians have about their albums, they're often jazz musicians, I've noticed, are very ambivalent about albums, because they capture an artist at a particular moment in time, and you know, the kind of unrepeatability of a performance is, am I right in understanding that it's kind of central to the way you think about jazz? What's your relationship with that view?
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. That, you know, for a lot of jazz musicians or anyone making improvised music or like spontaneous music, you know, the album is just a snapshot of a time and place and the interactions that people are having in that room. And that's beautiful. But equally, I think I love, some of my favorite albums are albums that like Miles Davis, On the Corner, or like Live Evil. Some of those albums, like, again, Don Cherry, I mentioned, Organic Music Society. Interestingly, are kind of like compilation albums, because like, but they've put them together themselves, if that helps. So it's almost like, again, like a curated playlist in a way, you know.
I read a quote from Miles Davis, which I read it actually. Tom York quoted it on in a Radiohead interview. Who said that he was actually sort of it almost made him physically ill, the expectations that his people who came out to see him had, of that he would just sort of create facsimiles of albums live on stage. He felt that was completely kind of contrary to everything he was trying to be as an artist, and he was actually quite he was very angry about it. Do you understand where he's from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the saving graces, I mean, of being a jazz musician is, you hope anyway, is that people come to see you perform and they don't come to see you play a song that they've heard of your album. You know, they come to see you spontaneously kind of create music and just, express yourself on stage.
Yeah.
And you hope at least that, you know, that can be a very freeing thing, where like you realize that people almost have more respect for you as an artist than they do for one particular song. They won't be very angry if you didn't play one song from one of your albums, you know.
Yeah.
It's hardly about that. I mean, I watched a Radiohead gig where they played like completely new material and no one cared. No one seemed to care. Like, everyone was just like...
Is that your dream? That must be a bit of
That is my dream. Yeah. I mean, I would love to like play music that no one, you know, is expected to come to hear, but they still take it and they're open enough to listen to it because they're like, yeah, this is what he wants to share. It's fine. Let's see if it affects us. Yeah.
Is there a part of you, Sophie, is there a part of you listening to Sarathy that wishes that you could carve out a space in which you could do a 12-minute jazz version of Murder on the Dance Floor?
No, I don't really have that itch to scratch. I feel, I mean, I suppose I'm a different sort of performer. I feel like my job is to entertain, and I sort of take on that mantle. I'm really pretty happy to do the songs people want to hear from me. I mean, I totally get that if you're a fan of someone who might do something unpredictable like that, and I definitely want to capture an atmosphere, but I want to give it completely like a unique experience. I always think gigs are like dates anyway. You've kind of got you and the crowd, and between, you know, you get chemistry and hopefully you have a really great date. But no, I want them to leave having heard the songs they hope to hear from me, I guess. And it's a good job that's made me happy, because I think that's probably the best option for someone who does the sort of music I do.
I think it depends on the art. I mean, I mean, it's very convenient that your answer was very different to Sarathy's, because I don't think I want to hear a 12-minute jazz version of Murder on the Dance Floor. But if I go and see Sarathy, I do like to see some inspired, electrifying improvisation. So
Yeah,
all's well that ends well, really, I guess.
hope I can still do some electrifying improvisation anyway.
Yeah, maybe I'll improvise my way home. I've noticed, actually, I've just quickly glanced over to the comments. It's kind of hard to do, but I'm a terrible multitasker. But I've got to say, you know, if we were to take a vote on this, I think the answer to the question, should compilations count as real albums, I think there'd be an overwhelming yes. I mean, I've got Merope Mills saying Guys and Dolls and Moana, yes. Phoebe says I have now 85 on vinyl and it's fab. Susie Watford says yes, Abigold. So there we are. I think if we were to take a vote on it, that would very much be the and it still goes on. Someone mentioned the Blues Brothers and Grease, and actually that's a good point. I mean, compilations are the great thing about compilations is the sort of educational value that they have, and the kind. I remember I was talking to someone the other week about the What's Happening Stateside compilation that came out in the 80s that introduced me to Irma Thomas and Garnet Mims and all these fantastic Ira Neville, I think, all these fantastic, so they definitely have, they're like a kind of rocket launcher, kind of firing you off in all sorts of different directions. Norman, are you still, have we lost you, Norman?
No, I'm here.
Oh wow, thank you, that's fantastic. So if we were to ask you, if we were to enlist your help in creating, is your aversion to lists so great that if we were to ask your help to try and help us put one together, that you'd
I'm just saying in a general sense, you know, I don't do them. I don't make lists. Never really followed charts. I always just trusted my own ears and my own instinct.
The issue of representation, it kind of occurred to me in a sort of roundabout way, you know, because I sort of over in my adult life, I started collecting old music magazines that I wouldn't have bought as a child. So sort of Blues and Soul is a very good example, and then the reggae offshoot of Blues and Soul. Remind me what that was called.
Echoes.
No, it was the
Black Music magazine.
Black Music, yeah.
Yeah.
And you get an entirely different version of British history reading those magazines, and then you suddenly realize, and I think that's kind of partly the reason why I kind of over time I've been sort of thinking, you know, you never see, for instance, 1000 Volts of Holt in these lists, and it's through seeing these magazines that you sort of realize what a massively important record, just to take one at random, is.
Every black household has a copy.
Yeah. So it's kind of I guess that's sort of the sort of thinking behind it. But so it's nice to sort of, I wanted to pick you up on a previous point as well, Norman, if I may briefly, from your experience of being at Talking Loud and sort of steering the careers of people like the young disciples. Was that quite easy to do within the kind of context of a major record label?
Yes, I guess yes and no, because the record company hired Giles and myself to come in and create an imprint which would basically reflect the younger side of the record company. And we didn't have a clue. You know, Giles and I, well, Giles had a little bit more experience than me, but I'd never worked in a record company before and had no wish to. You know, truth be known, they chased me for about 6 months to come and join them. And it's only finally Giles whispering in my ears that it would be great to come and do it. And it was great. And it was a steep learning curve, brilliant experience. But I guess we broke the mold there, because Charles and I had no clue. So we thought, well, we're both doing successful gigs, and we both understood that there were a lot of burgeoning musicians, songwriters, producers in our crowds. So we thought we'd just give our friends demo money to go in, and that's the truth of it. We thought we'd just give our friends some money to go in and see what happens. It was an experiment. And some of them came out with some amazing stuff. You know, some of the bands that we know now and take for granted, you know, like the Brand New Heavies, you know, like Jamiroquai. I could name check, you know, the who's who of great British bands and emerging artists in the late 80s, early 90s, and throughout. And we just thought, we'll give our friends some money, see what happens. And some of them came up with some amazing stuff, and that gave us the basis of our label. It wasn't commercial. We knew that the people upstairs were going to go, this is too trendy, this is too London, this will never sell. But the biggest thing we used to get was, you'll never get this on Radio 1, you know, the #1 gatekeeper, music gatekeeper in the country. And our artists used to turn around and go, well, we don't want to be pop stars. We're not making, you know, this is, you know, freedom of expression. This is creative freedom.
That's the other thing that I think. Sorry, go on.
Charles and I were caught in the middle of the heavy foot of the bean counters upstairs telling us, you know, you need to get this record out. This record needs to be on Radio 1 playlist, AOB, and we got our artists going, we want to see this record, you know, selling in Soho, in the jazz shops, you know, and for our 500 fans at Dingwalls on a Sunday.
Totally. And that's the right attitude in a way, isn't it? Because in years to come, those are the bands that kind of have those priorities. Those are the records that sort of sell in years to come. It's very interesting to see, you know, recently to see Mark Ronson has recently worked with the Brand New Heavies, hasn't he?
And but the trouble is, those artists never see second albums.
Why is that?
Because of sales, mostly. Because of the failure to get it, you know, on the national BBC playlists around the country. You know, who were then in those days were staffed by old men and old women who never went out anyway. You know, all they were interested in was the safe bets. You know, Elton John's greatest hits, another Beatles reissue. You know, all the great big rock bands, because they were safe, because they could keep selling and reselling those formats. They weren't really interested, you know, in developing new talent at that level. But you know, I quickly understood was that creative talent starts off best, you know, on its own or very locally, not signed to majors. You know, I would never advise kids, you know, if you're starting out in your career, to go and sign a major record deal. Why? Do it yourself. Do it at home.
Presuming Sarathy would agree with that.
Yeah.
Sarathy? Have we lost Sarathy?
No.
Anyway, I mean, I think.
Hey, sorry.
No. Actually, this kind of goes out to both you and Norman in a way, because I sort of think that you know, we're really seeing the scene that Sarathy is affiliated with at this moment in time. This sort of, you know, Ezra Collective and Sons of Kemet and all these incredible artists that kind of steam down, these incredible, you know, the attitude, the sort of principle of their creativity, you know, seems, if I think about the sort of DJs that sort of represent that, you know, that seems to be kind of more, I see parallels between the sort of the attitude of the Talking Loud roster and the artists that are coming through now. A lot of them being played on Giles' show, of course, so that kind of squares the circle in a way. Are you is that a scene that Sarathy, are you familiar with some of those artists that Norman talked about? And Norman, are you familiar with these emerging jazz musicians that are coming through?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with. Oh, go Sarathy first.
No, I think, yeah, definitely. And I think you're right. There's definite parallels with the stuff Norman was doing and the stuff that's happening. You know, you go to any of these gigs, you go to a Sons of Kemet gig, Ezra Collective, like all these people you mentioned, and you can tell that there's a scene. There's people coming to these gigs and it's a party, you know, it's amazing. There's people listening to this music. It's like, it's a community. And maybe they're not getting played on BBC One, or they're not on the greatest kind of albums of the year lists, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it begs to ask the question, you know, whose experiences are valued in this, in these lists, you know? Is the experience of a young black or brown British person going to a Steam Down or an Ezra Collective gig as important as somebody else who's, you know, trying to listen to the Guns N' Roses record on repeat in their car?
Yeah.
And I think that's where these lists, you know, are problematic. And you've got to highlight the fact that some people's experiences and musics are obviously prioritized over others, you know.
Yeah, and we need to sort of do something about it.
Yeah, so like just on that point about lists, I think like lists, we can have both. You can have lists with better representation, and you can have people saying that lists aren't important, because like we're seeing real change, real music, real people coming out to these gigs and stuff happening. I don't see why the two of them can't coexist in some way.
Okay.
But in my world, they coexist, because at the same time, you know, I would say, you know, I'm a lover of pop. I'm a fan of pop. And if you don't have pop music, then nothing else really matters.
No.
You know, I guess you need the most popular form of music, because not everyone is a music aficionado.
No.
You know, anyone who makes music, anyone who plays music, anyone who does anything live will tell you that. You know, if you're playing music live and you're making great music live, by and large, you are playing to your home base, your home fans of people who are into you and what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, Johnny's waiting for his bus. He's really not interested. You know, they need their music produced for them, made for them, given to them, spoon-fed to them. And pop is easy to digest. The great thing about pop, which is why I'll always defend popular music, why there's nothing wrong with popular music, because then it leaves you room to go and explore and discover something else. You know, I've never had an ambition to swim in the mainstream. But I'm thankful that there is a mainstream, so that I can operate, you know, in the shadows, in the nether regions, and go and discover things and scare people and lift the lid on things that hide in dark corners. That's just my thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, I happily exist in both worlds. I've got no problem. I love the creative thing. You know, I haven't been to a live gig in years, literally. But I'm quite happy to go to a live gig, you know, say something like Sarathy, and hear him improvise for an hour or two. I wouldn't be bored of that. I like that. But at the same time, I might go and see someone, you know, who can I cite, you know, God rest him, like a Luther Vandross. And I'd want to hear all his hits. I want to hear all the songs I know that made me go, wow. You know, and that's the beauty of music. It's the process of discovery. Whether you're into pop and you need your music in bite-sized, repetitive, easy things, there's nothing wrong with that. Because, you know, for those who aren't like that, it's the freedom of choice to go and find someone who's creating something really special, you know, that speaks to you, that calls you out. That,
absolutely. And
moment.
What you've said, Norman, is actually borne out by some of these comments that we're getting, which is, you know, it really, it does feel like music should be a safe place, and it's an honor to have had the three of you here, because you know, you have all been involved either through making records or playing records that I've absolutely fallen in love with. So, and all, you know, it's we need all of it, and so the comments that we get you through is just lovely, actually, because you've got Liz Mosley saying, I will hear nothing against John Denver. Jonathan Chapman says, no mention yet of my all-time favorite, Songs in the Key of Life, Stevie Wonder. Well, we've mentioned it now. And Jesus Christ Superstar soundtrack. David just got the new War on Drugs live album on vinyl yesterday. Toby Smith, Pavement, Slanted and Enchanted, one of my favorites, got to say. And anyway, it goes on. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions and your comments. And it's lovely to see people talking to each other on the side of my screen. Sophie, Sarathy, and Norman, I think it's been an hour. I think am I winding this up? I think I'm winding this up now. Thank you very much, Sophie. Sarathi, your pictures have gone, but I assume you're still
here.
Oh.
Yeah,
Still here.
Sophie, Sarathy, I doff my hat. Enough respect.
Thank you, guys.
Lovely to spend an evening with you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
So much. Thank you. It's been an honor. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.